In the great grand scheme of things, we're just tiny specks that will one day be forgotten. So it doesn't matter what we did in the past or how we'll be remembered. The only thing that matters is right now, this moment, this one spectacular moment we are sharing together.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you would be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, my name is Jackie Perez Gratz. I'm the vocalist, cellist of Grayceon.
And how would you describe the music of Grayceon?
I would describe it as a very intimate but heavy album of our new work that we wrote over the course of the last couple of years. And we tracked it actually in January, so it's been a really quick turnover. We've been very anxious to get it in the hands of our listeners.
So that's actually a fairly Fairly common question, I imagine, asking you what kind of music you make. I noticed that you guys get lumped into progressive metal, avant-garde metal, stuff like that. How do you feel about all those terms?
Yeah, well, you notice that when you asked me, I kind of was a little stumped. I don't mind any of those descriptions, but it can be all of those things and it can be none of those things. There's not really a genre that you can pinpoint on it. And we're not really trying to fit in a certain genre. So I don't mind any of those descriptions. Yeah.
And I think really the key to people, or maybe the confusion around what kind of music you make, comes down to the fact that it's a heavy rock band with a cellist, which I think a lot of people don't really know what to make of that.
Yeah, and it's a power trio too, right? So it's just the three of us, but then we don't have a bass. We have the cello instead, but the cello doesn't play the same role as a bass would play in a trio. We always joke like it's metal, but to people that like metal, we're not heavy enough. But to people that don't like metal, we're like way too metal. So you can't win, you know.
So I should also point out that you've worked with the band Amber Asylum, and you know, if people aren't familiar with Grayceon or Amber Asylum, they've probably heard your session work with bands like Neurosis, Agalok, Cattle Decapitation, a lot of the bands from the Bay Area and in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah. Yeah, and Amber Asylum's another band that is kind of hard to pigeonhole in that way, genre-wise. And Amber Asylum was always thrown into the metal scene. Like we were on a sub-label of Relapse, and we always played metal shows with other metal bands. But to just take us out of that context of the Bay Area metal scene and just listen to an Amber Asylum song, it doesn't sound metal at all. But it still has that same kind of darkness and heaviness. So, yeah.
Now, how do you feel about that? Do you like playing to a largely metal and heavy rock audience, or would you rather that your music maybe had a wider or reached a different audience?
I don't have a preference. I mean, I love metal, and I love our colleagues and comrades in the metal scene in the Bay Area. So I love playing shows with our friends that are also playing metal. The audience, you know, whoever wants to listen and whoever likes us is fine by me. I think that in Amber Asylum, it was hard playing to metalheads because we were very quiet and delicate on stage. And so you could hear any kind of like talking or cash registers or what have you, like happening while we were performing on stage. And that is very hard just mentally. And sometimes we get that when Grayceon is playing kind of quieter moments on stage. So if you're playing to a different audience that is not necessarily expecting to hear really loud music, they may be a little more, I don't want to say respectful, but they may be just a little more conscious about, you know, making noise as an audience member.
There have been bands like, you know, My Dying Bride, for example, or even the first At the Gates album, where, you know, there was definitely a role for classical instruments in those bands. But I think metalheads are used to the violin coming in at an interlude or during an intro or something like that, and not necessarily a whole song or even like a whole, you know, sets worth of classical instrumentation.
Yeah, they've been used typically in heavy music as a way to sort of set the scene or set a vibe, or, you know, play one melancholy melody in one place or another. And yeah, in Grayceon, it's definitely only one of two melodic instruments and only one of three instruments total. And we all kind of just take turns playing solo, or we sometimes joke like we're soloing on top of each other like the whole time. And I'm not sure there are any other bands that really use classical instruments in that way. But yeah, that's kind of what makes us different.
One last thing about Amber Asylum, and then we'll move on. But to me, it was always an interesting argument because, not argument, but I would hold Amber Asylum as an example of a metal band that doesn't use metal instruments. Like if the stereotype of metal is, you know, guitars and drums being played really fast, or, really slow or whatever, you could take any Amber Asylum song and transpose the music to, a typically rock instrumentation, and it would be incredibly heavy music. And it kind of came down to the almost philosophical question of, what is metal? Is metal just the instruments, or is it the actual notes and instrumentation and song structure that makes a song metal?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a conglomeration of all those things, right? I mean, I get asked a lot, just like, what's my favorite classical, or how did I jump from, being in a classical realm to being in metal? And the same question could kind of be asked in reverse, right? Like, there are some classical composers where you listen to it and it's so metal, not because of the instrumentation, obviously, but just because of the riffs, So I don't know, maybe metal is a feeling, or metal is a vibe that you can put into your music making, into your melodies, into your riffs. And it doesn't necessarily have to be guitar and drums. At least I hope it doesn't have to be.
So let's go to that question that you got asked. How did you jump from playing cello to playing in a lot of heavy metal bands?
I would have to say that, I mean, not to keep going back to Amber Asylum, but Amber Asylum was definitely my sort of gateway drug into metal in the Bay Area. Both my parents are classical musicians, so I started playing cello when I was really young, and it was kind of all I knew growing up in terms of just thinking that's what you did. You reach a certain age and then you pick out what classical instrument you want to play, because that's all I saw and was involved with as a young person. And then playing with Amber Asylum, that was my first adventure in playing in a band and performing in a band context. I had performed a lot prior to that in orchestras and small ensembles, playing in quartets at weddings, that kind of thing. But Amber Asylum, because we were so embraced by the metal scene, I got a lot of exposure into just the metal scene here and playing with a lot of metal bands, metal venues. And Chris Force of Amber Asylum was very good friends with several of the guys in Neurosis. And that was Neurosis was the first band that I played in as a guest outside of Amber Asylum. And then from there, I just kept getting asked to do strings in metal projects. And I really liked listening to metal. So it seemed like a sort of natural progression to play heavier music. And I originally picked up the bass and tried to teach myself bass, but I would get very frustrated very quickly because I couldn't play the things that I had in my head. So at a certain point, I just said, screw it. I'm going to just play the cello, because I'm already pretty, accomplished at that instrument, and I can execute the things that I want to write.
So that's actually really interesting to me that I'm assuming when you're saying that you tried to play the bass, this was for Grayceon?
Yeah, it was before Grayceon formed. But when I kind of knew that I wanted to play heavier music, I had a spell of trying to teach myself how to play bass. I did play bass, electric bass, in a jazz band when I was in 6th grade for like a year. And I don't remember any of it. I have a picture to prove that it happened, but I don't, the bass is actually pretty different than the cello. Like, the strings aren't the same, and they're not even the same, number of notes apart. They're in fourths instead of fifths. And I mean, obviously, I could be more agile with my left hand, more so than someone just picking up a string instrument for the first time. But yeah, it was a very different instrument. So I kind of gave up on it, sadly.
Prior to Amber Asylum and working with bands like Neurosis, did you have much exposure to heavy music?
I did a little bit. My sister is 2 years older than me, so some of the music she was listening to, I would get involved in. But yeah, not really until I graduated high school and started playing in Amber Asylum did I really get interested in metal. When I was in high school, I was really into alternative music, which nowadays is a term that's kind of strange to use, but back in those days, in the late 80s and early 90s, alternative meant, Jane's Addiction and grunge, Nirvana, those kinds of bands was what I was listening to in high school.
So let's talk about the origins of Grayceon. At what point did you decide that you wanted to stick with the cello and integrate the cello into heavier music?
I had actually been thinking about playing heavier music before Max and Zach approached me to play in Grayceon. So I had been in Amber Asylum, but also trying to teach myself bass with an idea that I would, try to form or try to be a part of a heavier project, like a metal project. And then, I was really big fans of Max and Zach's thrash band, Walkin', and they were also big fans of Amber Asylum. So we would see each other at each other's shows, and we were fans of each other's bands, and we became friends. And what I didn't realize at the time was Zach's first instrument is drums. He played bass in Walkin', but his first instrument was drums. And he and Max would jam with Zach on drums and Max on guitar. And they had all these riffs. They jam all the time. And they had all these riffs, and they had decided that they wanted to ask me to be in their band on cello. And one New Year's Eve party, they asked me, and I was like, well, what riffs are you guys working on? Will you guys just make me a recording or give me a recording? And so of course I'm thinking like a cassette tape of a practice. So they're like, yeah, we'll get you a recording. I just was interested in what the riff sounded like. And they came back like a month and a half later with like a full blown like demo that they had like gone into the studio and recorded. And it was pretty awesome. I was like, wow, okay, you guys are serious. You one, like have a lot of riffs you're already forming into songs. And two, you really want me to be in your band because I just asked to hear some of the riffs, and they basically presented me with this demo so that I would get excited about it and join.
Now, was it tricky trying to integrate your style or your instrument into what they had written?
No, not really. I mean, I would say that the vocals were the hardest. Writing against the riffs was super fun and challenging because Max's writing style is unique. He does a lot of interesting tempos and a lot of quick changes between riffs. And oftentimes, especially in the earlier songs that we were writing, not a lot of repetition of riffs. Like we just kind of start going and then the riffs would keep changing and we just keep moving forward. We'd very rarely go back to another riff. So that was really fun to write to. But vocals is a whole nother story. That is very challenging to do, especially when the riffs don't repeat and the riffs are kind of complicated and mixed up, quiet riff right up against a heavier riff. But we've developed the vocals over, the last 12 years or however long we've been a band, 14 years now. So I think the vocals play more of a hand in actually helping arrange the song now, as opposed to before where we were just writing the music and then adding the vocals on top.
So we talked a lot about your background as a cellist, but we didn't really talk about your vocals. Were you also classically trained as a vocalist?
No, I mean, I always sang as a young person, and my dad, even to this day, sometimes will be like, "Oh, I should have nurtured you to be like an opera singer or something," because I've always been a really loud kid. I talk really loud, and when I got braces in high school, the orthodontist was just like, "You have a really, like, the roof of your mouth is really tall, like uniquely really tall." And my dad is always laughing like, "Oh, that's why you're so loud." So I've always been a singer, but no, I never had any training. When Grayceon started, we were very intent on not being an instrumental band, but none of us wanted to sing. So I kind of convinced Max to sing with me because we wanted to have this cool, like, double male female vocal thing happening. And so he and I were actually both taking vocal lessons for the duration of the first 2 Grayceon albums. But then at a certain point, he just dropped off and was like, I'm not into it. I don't want to do it. I think that it was a different experience trying to do the vocals live. He never really got comfortable singing and playing at the same time. So singing live was a challenge. And so he kind of bowed out after our second record. And then it's just been me singing. But I only took singing lessons for like a year.
How much of the material that Max and Zach demoed ended up on that first album?
None, actually. The song that they demoed was Love Is, which is on the second album. We tracked it for the first album, but we didn't like, I think it was Max got really hung up on the speed. He was like, "It's too fast. I don't like it. I don't want to release it at that speed." And we didn't go back into the studio to record it. So we just kind of shelved it. So that very first song that they had brought into me was Love Is, which is on our second record.
So from that initial demo, which I guess they wrote the music and the song structures themselves, to the first album when you guys were a full band, how did your writing process change?
Between when they gave me the demo and then when I joined?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't think it really changed that much. I mean, I just kind of jumped into the mix, right? So Max is super prolific. He writes lots of riffs, and he'd bring in a riff and we just kind of jam it out and practice. And then if it sounded good with another riff that either he wrote or I wrote, then we'd throw that into the song. And I think in the early days, we had a hard time figuring out when we wanted the songs to stop, because we'd keep writing riffs and we'd be like, but that sounds so good with this riff. So should we keep it for a new song or just keep going with this song? And more likely than not, we would just keep going with that same song. But now I always feel like I'm playing catch up with Max because he's, like I said, he's super prolific. So I have to play catch up, and I have to really try hard to like write lots of riffs if I want to make sure that my riffs get into the songs, because he's always got like a million more riffs that he's been working on.
Those first 2 albums were recently re-released, I think last month, right? At the end of 2020?
Yeah, they were released the same day as Mothers, Weavers, Vultures, but it's just the digital. So the CDs were not repressed or anything. So it's just the digitals got re-released because they got remastered. And those 2 records were never released digitally. Like, that's how long ago the albums came out. Like, that wasn't even a thing really. Back in 2006, 2007, there weren't many platforms on which to buy digital music. So those 2 albums over the years have kind of just gotten forgot about unless you buy the physical CD. You couldn't hear them on Spotify. You couldn't hear them. You couldn't buy them on iTunes. Like, they were just almost obsolete. So this re-release of the remaster that just happened in December was really exciting because now it's available everywhere. You can hear it on all those platforms that have since 2006, 2007 have become, the place to get music. I mean, a lot of people don't buy any media at all. Like, they only buy their music digitally.
How would you compare Grayceon circa 2006, 2007 specifically those first two albums, to Grayceon currently?
The band or the music?
The music. I mean, you could talk about the band too if you want, but I'm curious if you feel like you guys have gelled more as musicians, or if you feel like your style has changed since those first two recordings.
I don't think our style has changed that much. I think that the newest record, Max has a slightly different guitar tuning. So it's going to have just a slight different feel to it, the new record, whereas all the other records are in a different tuning. But I think that the biggest differences are going to be the way we're arranging the songs. We don't have a formula, and we're not going for a formula, but I think we've kind of found, just amongst us three, we found a kind of happier place in terms of like how we're arranging the songs, where it's not as much guesswork. Like the songs can kind of come together more easily now as they did in those early days. And I'm also writing vocals at the same time as we're writing the music, way more so now than in those early days. So the vocals can inform some of the arranging. Instead of having a song like Love Is, which was the first song where almost none of the parts repeat, instead of me having to get that song and be like, okay, how do I make this feel like a song with the vocals? I am now informing the arrangement where I can say, this riff, I'm definitely going to want to sing on. So let's try to swing back to this riff at some point. Or let's try to make this verse-like, where we can, have it once at the beginning in a kind of long form, but then come back to it again relatively soon after that in a shorter form. So we kind of make the arrangements more formulaic now, but I mean, formulaic just for lack of a better word. It's not, the songs still have a lot of flexible breathing room in terms of how we arrange them. But I would say that's probably the biggest difference in the music between then and now.
I mean, maybe not formulaic, but maybe an emphasis on repetition.
Yeah. Although even then it's not, you can listen to This Bed and you can kind of piecemeal a verse and a chorus happening in the first part of the song. And then like the whole second of the song, half of the song is like totally different riffs and, no vocals repeat after that. So not formulaic, but definitely just the vocals. I think we're structuring our songs better now. And I think that we're creating more song feel from our music. And I think that the vocals informing the structure is helping with that.
So the album that we're talking about is called Mothers, Weavers, Vultures, and it came out at the end of 2020. You spoke a little bit about the recording of the album. I believe you said that you started working on it in January of last year?
No, we tracked in January of 2020. So we wrote it in. So for our previous release, our previous album, 4, we wrote like 6 or 7 years ago. And I needed to take a little health hiatus right at the point at which that album was practically done being written. And so we shelved it for a good 3 years, 4 years. So when we got back into the swing of being a band and finishing that record, we were already writing this new record, if that makes sense.
So how long had you guys actually been working on this album?
We worked on this album for about 2 years, and then we tracked in January 2020, and we, just mixed and mastered, and we just made it in before all the shelter in place restrictions. We had gone into the studio at the end of January. We had some overdubs in February, and then everything was shut down in like the first week in March. So in the spring and summer of 2020, we were just mixing and mastering and sending each other notes, that kind of thing. But the previous 2 years, so 2018, I think 4 came out in 2018. So 2018 and 2019, we were writing.
And you recorded this album with Jack Shirley, right?
Yes.
So you've worked with Jack, I believe, on all of your albums. Is that correct?
That is correct. He even did the demo that Max and Zach did to get me into the band.
Is working with Jack, is it just the comfort? Does he understand the music better than most studio engineers would understand?
I think that Jack is our honorary 4th member. He understands the music. He understands us. I mean, he's family to us. He's gotten really good over the years. So he constantly is wanting to make every album sound better than the last album. And I think that first demo, he was just recording in like the garage of his like parents' house or something like that. And now he has this like huge, beautiful, amazing, state-of-the-art studio in Oakland. So I think it's a bit of both. I think it's comfort, but it's also him just really knowing the essence of Grayceon, understanding the essence of Grayceon, and being able to, help us make every release, better than the last one.
So what is the essence of Grayceon?
I don't know. That's a hard question. I think the essence of Grayceon is just, us 3. Like we always, and that's why we made the band name what we did. We wanted to have a name that was totally made up so that anytime that name was used, it would mean us 3. Like it would have no other meaning except for us 3. And we always say that we'll keep writing and playing as long as we're having fun, and we're family. They're my best friends. They're the uncles to my children. And I don't know. I think the essence of Grayceon is just our friendship and how much fun we have playing music together.
You mentioned a song from the demo days that was shelved because one of the members didn't like the pace or didn't think the pace fit the band style. Is there anything Grayceon wouldn't do musically?
I don't think so. I mean, we sometimes will put little challenges on ourselves, like let's write the shortest song we can write or something like that. And just because it's fun and something we've never done before, I think that that's kind of what keeps us thriving, is always trying to do something we've never done before. So no, I don't think there's anything we wouldn't do. We've talked about maybe doing an album where it's just the whole album is one song. I mean, there are several bands that have done that in the past, but we think that we've never done it and we think it'd be fun. Not so much because we want to shtick or we've run out of ideas, but just because it's something we've never done before. And, maybe we'll like it. But I don't think we'd put out an instrument. Well, I don't know. I was going to say maybe we wouldn't consider putting out an instrumental album just because when we started the band, we wanted to make sure we weren't an instrumental band. But I don't know. That kind of sounds fun, doing just an instrumental album. So who knows? I don't think there's anything that is off the table.
I mean, the song as album, or the full 50-minute song or whatever, seems like a pretty natural fit for Grayceon.
It does. And we have several 20-minute songs in previous albums that, yeah, we probably could have just kept tacking on to that song and like made it big. I think Zach just wants to say, this is our last song, like at the beginning of our set. So maybe he'll get his wish one day. I don't know.
So let's talk about Translation Loss. I believe this is the second Grayceon release that Translation Loss is releasing.
Yes.
How did they get involved with you guys? Or how did you get involved with them?
I actually don't know the origin of my personal connection to them, but Grayceon, so I'm also in Giant Squid, and Giant Squid had put out a couple of records with Translation Loss. So I had a relationship with the label and the people that run the label before Grayceon started putting records out with them. And I think for 4, because we had this really long hiatus, by the time we actually finished the album, we were like, we want this album to come out like tomorrow. So rather than do research and approach a bunch of labels that maybe we thought would be appropriate, but we'd be cold calling essentially, I was like, we should just ask Translation Loss. Like they're rad guys, and the music is, they're putting out a lot of metal, but they're also putting out some other stuff that's not necessarily metal. So it's probably a perfect match for Grayceon. And in talking with them, they were like, yeah, let's try to do it. So I don't think that any other label would have been able to, release an album that quickly. And they were kind of doing it as a favor for me. And then when this album was ready, they're just like, you have to let us put it out. Like they are now, fans of Grayceon and really believe in what we're doing. And they really wanted to put this record out. And that's a really nice feeling as a band, to know that your label is excited and wanting to release your music.
So Grayceon is an established entity at this point, as are you. But I'm curious, in the, especially before those first 2 albums, did you have a hard time finding a label that was interested in your music or knew how to market you guys?
You mean for the first couple records?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really know where to go or who was going to be good. I think we sent out demos to a bunch of labels. I didn't really have much connection to labels at that point, aside from what Amber Asylum was on. I think Amber Asylum put out 1 record on Neurot and several albums on Release, which was a sub-label of Relapse. So obviously those labels got our demo, and then, we just did a bunch of research on, okay, what are the labels that are releasing music of bands that we really like? And so we had sent out demos, and that's how we ended up getting on Venless Records, which actually isn't a label anymore, but our first 2 albums were put out on Venless.
And eventually you guys released some albums on Profound Lore, right?
Yeah, we did 1 album on Profound Lore. It's funny because a lot of people say that a lot of fans always mark that album as their favorite album. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because it's on Profound Lore, but I mean, I do love that album, but there are lots of other good albums too. And then I think when it came time to do the next album, it wasn't, the Profound Lore wasn't able to release it as quickly as we wanted, because our next full length after that was 4. It had been that long of a time. We had an EP come out on vinyl on Flenser, but that was always meant to be a vinyl only, just EP kind of one-off. And I assumed that we would then, go back to Profound Lore for our next full length. But I guess just the way it happened with the big break, and then us really wanting it to come out fast, it wasn't possible for Profound Lore to do.
The Flenser is an interesting label. I believe I interviewed a couple bands that are signed to them. I guess Grayceon fits on that label in the sense that almost nothing on that label sounds like anything else on that label. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
I'm on their mailing list, and I get some very entertaining emails from them.
Yeah, they have a lot of different stuff, but it's all interesting, and it's all kind of different. I really like that about Flinzer because that he is putting out stuff that he really likes and wants to put out. I don't know. I think they describe themselves as dark experimental. Like the label describes themselves as dark experimental. So a lot of stuff falls into that category.
Now, was that something that you guys were looking for in a label? A label that has more of an eclectic roster, where the label isn't necessarily associated with a single sound or a single style?
Yeah, I mean, it became very obvious early on. I mean, especially when we were trying to find a label for the first 2 records, that some labels that were just, they had their stable of artists that were all, very definitively like one kind of metal, that those labels weren't going to be interested in us. Like they probably wouldn't even know what to do with us. So that definitely was taken into account with all of our releases.
Mothers, Weavers, Vultures is out now through Translation Lost Records. Jackie, what is the best way for people to order this album?
Well, fortunately and unfortunately, I think the vinyl is pretty much sold out at this point. I would send you to Translation Loss for vinyl and then our Bandcamp for digital. Grayceon is actually, as a band, releasing the digital version of this album. So the best place to go to buy it digitally is grayceon.bandcamp.com. And then vinyl, I don't think there's any left. So we're actually already, kind of talking a little bit with the label to see what we can do, because the record's I don't even think the record's been out for a month. It came out December 18th. So either didn't make very many copies or, people are just really excited about it. So you can still buy it digitally though. And Grayceon is donating all of our proceeds from digital to a couple of nonprofits that we believe strongly in. And aside from that, you can also just visit our website, grayceon.com. You can follow us on Instagram. We're grayceon.sf. That's our handle on Instagram. And yeah, we have shirts at Bandcamp too.
So I do want to talk about the two nonprofits that you guys are working with. Tell me about Defenders of Wildlife and tell me about the Wildlife Conservation Society.
Well, without going too deep into just what each of them do, they're both organizations that are really pushing towards helping wildlife and the wildlife habitats that have become destroyed or compromised by the climate crisis. So it's very specific what they're doing, but yeah, they're basically, protectors of wildlife and the habitat and their habitats.
And that's a theme that is prevalent on this latest album, right?
Yeah, it's one of the big themes and one of the reasons why we wanted to try to raise funds for those organizations. But the album in general is just an observation of just the kind of mess we're in, and that, we've been hearing for over a decade or over 2 decades now, that there's going to be a time when, shit's going to get real, but it's always like kind of far out. It's always like, in 30 years or in 50 years or in whenever, like things are going to be really bad. But that time is now. Like we're in the future right now. We're already seeing all the causes and all the effects of the climate crisis. So that's been very much in the forefront of my mind the last couple of years. And, I wrote the vocals for this album over the last couple of years. So it felt very natural to sing about that. And we figured, I don't know, people were kind of advising us to not release our record in 2020 just because of the pandemic. And like, is it going to be tone deaf to be trying to push people to like buy a record? Because like, who cares really at the end of the day? Because there's so much other more important stuff going on. But we felt really strongly about getting it out as soon as possible, because even though the album is very much about the kind of decline of the environment and also the decline of humanity and, just climate crisis in general, it's still, I think that the lyrics and the themes are still very appropriate for what is happening right now. That's not so much like specifically related to the environment crisis, but it certainly is relevant peripherally, if that makes sense.
Now, was Grayceon always a message band, or is this something that's come into your music recently?
Yeah, I just laugh because I never thought that I would be I mean, it's funny that you label it message band, because I would never.
Well, I don't want to say, I didn't want to say political. I know,
Yeah, I mean,
people have strong reactions to, like, I don't really know,
Yeah.
Some people have, like, for example, the band Earth Crisis, they have a very specific message that they want to get across. I wouldn't necessarily call them political. In fact, some of their politics I find incredibly distasteful.
Yeah.
but some bands have a message that they want to get across, and some bands have an ideology that they belong to.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, and there are whole genres based around that some bands with specific messages. But no, Grayceon's never been. I always feel like I never really have that much to say. And so I'm never just like, oh, I gotta say this stuff. I gotta make sure everyone knows this stuff. Our last album, 4, had one song on it that was peripherally about Trump supporters. And that was like the single song in all of Grayceon's repertoire that was sort of about anything that was not just a personal experience. But then, and then this album came along and it kind of just spilled out. Like, it's not necessarily a message. I don't want it to sound, I didn't want the album to sound like I'm wagging a finger or I have solutions or anything like that. It's really just a kind of personal observation. And I hope it comes across as that.
I mean, you alluded to this, but I think in trying times like what we're going through now, it's the question of how relevant art is or music is something that a lot of artists and musicians have to tackle. And at the end of the day, we can't all switch fields and go into climate science or political activism or whatever. And exactly. We have to just do our little part that we can. Yeah. If it's something we believe strongly about. Yeah. I mean, I have a death metal podcast. Like, I don't know exactly how I'm helping the environment right now, but it's what I do.
You are. I mean, we're talking about Mothers, Weavers, Vultures, right? If people go and buy it, if people hear this and like a song, and then they go and buy it, and then that money goes to one of these organizations. I mean, those organizations are the ones, saving the wolves and doing all the things they're doing.
Yeah.
So you're helping. Your death metal podcast is helping.
I mean, at the end of the day, like, all we can do is what we do, right? So.
Exactly.
Is there anything else you want?
And that's kind of what the album is. No, I was just going to say that's kind of what the album's about. Like, there's only so much, we can only do what we can do, and we're all kind of guilty of the mess we're in. But no, I thank you so much for this. Was such a wonderful time talking with you and very thoughtful questions. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks a lot.